Welcome to the Money Insights Podcast, where high-income earners come to learn wealth-building strategies that will take them from high income to high net worth. With your hosts, financial and wealth-building experts, Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie.
Welcome into another episode of the Money Insights Podcast, where we teach you how to invest with benefits. My name's Christian Allen, here with my co-host. You know him as Rod the Pod Zabriskie. Rod, what's up, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. We were recording less than an hour ago, and I was talking about how awful the weather is. I'm looking outside. The sun is shining. Suddenly, the weather doesn't feel so bad. So,
man,
an hour later, tides are changing. You know what? And I have a feeling that it's going to feel a lot like the global economy, right? Maybe a little bit gray, but the question is, Rod, are blue skies and sunshine on the horizon? So here's what we're going to do. Today, Rod is going to put on his economist hat. Rod, I feel like you should have a hat today. Maybe we should give you a hat, get you a hat that just says economist. Yeah. And then we'll be like, you can actually put on your economist hat.
I love it.
Anyway, Rod's going to put on the economist hat, and we're going to talk about 5 major issues, major points, 5 critical issues that are facing the economy today for 2024. Okay, so with that said, Rod, kick us off. Where do you want to start?
Okay, well, I want to start with my favorite thing about putting my economist hat on is I get to make fun of economists.
That's great. I love making fun of economists. Let's do it.
It's kind of like, have you ever had multiple weather apps and you look at one and it says the weather's going to be one thing, and you look at another and they say the weather's going to be something completely different?
Okay. Yes, but this is even weirder, Rod. My wife and I both have Apple phones.
Yeah.
We'll be right next to each other. We check our apps and they say different things all the time.
For where it is right now.
The same app, the same place, and it'll be like a degree different. Okay, that's neither here nor there. That's not what you were talking about. But to your point, yes, I have seen that happen, and it's a little bizarre, right? But here's the thing. Pretty obvious why it's that way. Because nobody actually knows the future. They are professional
prognosticators.
I was thinking about when you go in, you sit with a medium, that kind of thing. They're telling the future,
fortune
tellers. That's what I was looking for. Yeah. So they're like professional fortune tellers that have to just give a oh my gosh, I can't come up with words. So a disclaimer on the front end saying, I don't actually know what's going to happen at all. That said, here's what's going to happen. Okay, but I want to hear you tell me what's going to happen, Rod.
Yeah. Okay, let me indulge me for a second, because you take that weather example and it's to the extreme when it comes to economists. So in other words, you get a room full of economists and you ask them all their opinion and nobody agrees on what's going to happen.
So that's a little different than when you get so I like to follow the NBA, Rod.
Okay.
And there's a lot of prognosticators there.
Yes.
But when you go on to ESPN and you say, which team's going to win the championship, normally it's everybody's picking maybe 3 teams. Not the case in economics. You've got a lot of variables. They're all over the place, which means you can have a whole lot of variance.
And you do, yes. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pick out 5 topics and discuss them. We've done a little bit of research and kind of looked into see what the prognosticators are prognosticating as it relates to these topics. And then we'll kind of give some of our thoughts and just kind of have some fun with it.
Let's do it. Where are we starting?
Okay, we're going to start with inflation, which is probably the easiest and most obvious place to start, because that's been the big topic over the last 2 years and 2 years plus. And so, and because it drives a lot of other things that we're going to talk about as well, we're going to start there. So inflation obviously has come down since its peak at 7.6% or something in 2022. Came down significantly last year. And why did it come down? It came down because the Fed adjusted rates, and they were trying to slow the economy. Well, what's interesting about that is that their goal was to slow down the economy with a soft landing, right? That's kind of in this
the soft landing
phrase.
Yep. Which means,
and what's interesting is they don't have the control to do that. It's factors outside of their control that determines whether it's going to be a safe landing or not, right? So in other words, one of the reasons why they had to keep reducing rates is because as they began in 2022 reducing rates, they expected that would slow down the business market, especially the labor market, but it didn't. The labor report would keep coming out, and they were creating jobs and more jobs and more jobs, and so they're like, well, man, we have to keep reducing the interest rates, or sorry, we have to keep increasing rates more than we thought we were going to have to counter what's happening over here.
Pull the reins back a little bit.
So the soft landing looks like it's probably going to happen. Meaning, then soft landing just means that they bring inflation into control without creating a recession, like going too far and just kind of turning things on their head. Now, some people at individual level or at an individual business level would say, yeah, things were already turned on our head, right?
Yeah, that is one of the weirdest things, because can I just remind people, when we're talking about economics, we're actually talking about people.
Yep.
People. This is like super important for me to remember. I was listening to an economist, one that I subscribe to, and he was a proponent of pumping as much cash into the system as he could, because he didn't want a landing that was painful for a lot of people in the world. And it convinced me. I'm not going to lie, Rod. So anyway, I just want to remind people, we're talking about the economy, like, these are real people. So to your point, while it might be a soft landing as a whole, some people it's going to feel that way. So like, if I'm being totally honest, Rod, I haven't really felt it, right? Like, hasn't really been had an impact on me, but I try to remind myself that there are many, many other people who it's had a massive impact on. So anyway, just a side thought.
So you see people around you, I think about neighbors who have been absolutely impacted by interest rates. I think about jobs. I mean, think about, Silicon Valley Bank and all of the impact, the trickle down effect that it's had just in the tech industry as a whole by just kind of that collapse. So getting back to the topic of inflation, I think all of these things have worked toward reducing inflation, and the general consensus is that inflation will continue to come back into where we want it to be because of the steps that have been taken.
Okay, so the question, Rod, is, does Rod the economist agree with the general consensus that we're going to end up with a reasonably soft landing as a whole?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I feel like that's true.
Rod says inflation is no longer going to be an issue.
Prices will, and that's what's funny. Prices will keep going up.
The good news is we're not popular enough to get aggregated, Rod, so you'll probably be okay. But if we were, or actually, I guess it would be me that's getting aggregated. Okay, so inflation. I do think, though, like, inflation is one of those issues that just always is a fight, right? Like, it's just always going to be. So something to keep in mind. And our hope, of course, is that we can create a soft landing, and that, people's lives aren't affected, or at least they're affected as minimally as possible.
Yeah. Well, the weird thing about inflation is that our economy is built to have some level of inflation. And what the
3%.
2% is their target.
Oh, 2, man, I'm out of touch.
But what's funny,
that's why you're the economist.
Oh yeah, that's it. The powers that be have decided that having some level of inflation is better than having deflation. And so the system has been built to create some level of inflation and just not too much. So
yeah. Okay.
Will it be 2%? Probably not. But it'll be better. It won't be 7% 0.6
It'll
or
be
whatever
7
it was.
or 8. Yeah. So
It'll
that people
be
are
2
just
to 3,
like,
4.
well, because here's the problem with inflation. And maybe this is an important element to touch on. The problem is that wages don't increase anywhere near, well, at least oftentimes they're not increasing at the pace that we have inflation, especially in like medical expenses and things like that just are astronomical. Well, of course, the reason it has to be in control is because if there's not a balance between wages and inflation, then people's lives are affected.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe we can take a moment, because on all of the things we're going to talk about, a lot of it was created by just the pandemic and all the different things that happened there, creating
pumping a lot of money into the system.
A lot of money in the system. And kind of what's interesting is there was a very short period of time where wages went up dramatically, right? And then that drove some of these things that are happening now. And then the inflation kind of pushes past it. And so now we're back in that place that you were describing, where increases in wages are not keeping up now, even though for a moment they were kind of pushed ahead a little bit.
Yeah, good point. Okay, what are we talking about next, Rod?
Okay, next we're just going to talk about interest rates.
Okay,
no big deal.
Start with interest rates. You're going to get into most of it, but I have a personal fight in the game here.
Okay.
So I've talked about this on the pod. I'm building my house, my work compound, right?
Yep.
And Rod, can I just tell you, I didn't realize. Maybe I did, but like the difference in a house payment that for like 6% and 4% is huge.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
So like again, when we talk about things like interest rates, it's really impacting people's ability to pay for things.
Yep.
Right. And then of course you talk about interest rates and loans, people having a harder time getting a loan. Anyway, but what from your perspective, Rod, is going to be the most likely case as to what we see with interest rates for 2024?
Yeah. So the thing that I expected that would have happened more than it has up to this point is, to your point, because interest rates go up and because that impacts a mortgage payment so dramatically, a rise in interest rate is supposed to push values down, because affordability goes down. People can't buy them. The real estate market isn't moving. Well, what's going to make it move? Well, a drop in prices makes it move. And that's what, and there has been some of that. And obviously it's very much market specific, how much that has happened in different parts of the country is, it varies, but I would have expected it to be much more dramatic. And so what, in the research, what is it that has driven that? Well, there's been, for a while there, you couldn't get a home, and you know this more than anybody else. You were in a position where you wanted to get this compound 3 years ago, and you tried hard to make that happen, but properties were disappearing so fast, people were paying cash, etc., that it couldn't happen, right? Yeah. And that obviously drove prices higher, which, because of low interest rates, it was easier for prices to go higher. And now with interest rates having gone up, it obviously changes the dynamic of that, but interestingly, there's still a lot of people moving from California, selling their property at $1 million there, and then going and buying it in Idaho or Utah or South Carolina or Tennessee for $250 or something.
Okay, let's be really clear here. Utah and probably even Idaho are not the same kind of prices that you get in Tennessee, Rodney.
Agreed. They're just closer.
I just messing with you. But you're right. We are seeing, right? We see a lot of it. You think about, well, what you're saying is the impact of interest rates hasn't necessarily affected people moving from one place where values are higher to a place where they can get more bang for their buck. And of course, sometimes they're just buying in cash. They're not even having to worry about interest rates.
Yep.
And that's where the real benefit is for someone in that situation. If you're someone who's needing and wanting to borrow money, well, guess what? It's not a great time. or it's not as nice of a time. I say it's not a great time. Historically, Rod, interest rates aren't that high.
Right.
I try to remind myself, my parents will be like, when we bought our first house, it was like 12% interest or something like that.
Yeah.
And so even when I started in the industry, interest rates were like 6, 7, 8, right?
Yep.
So that was more typical. But we then got, I don't know if this is the right word, but we got spoiled with the ultra low interest rates. And so now we're at a place where anything above 4 feels like crazy, right?
Yeah. Well, and again, it is that interplay between interest rates and values, because back when I bought my first home and I paid 6.7%, I bought it for like 210 or something. Mm-hmm. Well, that same home is now going to be 500,000 or 600,000. So at the same interest rate, I'm paying the same, whatever, 6.5%. The payment on that is going to be, 2 to 3 times what.
And a fresh couple, with a couple of kids getting into their life has very little opportunity to get into a house like that when that situation is taking place.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the question, Rod. Interest rates, they have gone down a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
We saw it surge up and then we've seen it pull back a little bit. What is the general consensus and Rod's prognostication for interest rates over the rest of the year?
I think that the Fed, so they've announced that their expectation is that they'll reduce it, probably have 3 reductions of a 1/4 point each. So it'll come down 75 basis points.
Okay.
And that's all in line with this whole soft landing and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right? They had to raise it higher than it needed to be to rein things in, but then they'll bring it back down. And it's hard to say for sure. I don't think we're going to head to recession, like I said a little earlier, but I think there are going to be things that occur in the economy. Like, for example, taking Silicon Valley Bank as an example from last year, I think there will be things like that, triggers that will happen that will push them to drop rates maybe even sooner than they expect, or maybe even a little bit more. Not a lot more, but I wouldn't be surprised if instead of 75 basis points, it was more like 100 or 125 basis point drop by the end of 2020.
Okay. Well, I'm crossing my fingers, Rod, because I'm going to be getting a second close on my loan at that time. So it'll be perfect time for interest rates to come down for me.
Okay.
Okay, sweet. Well, we're keeping an eye on it. And again, interest rates affect real people.
Yep.
Real people.
As we speak.
Okay, what's next?
Okay, so the third piece is just overall growth. And so this is GDP, but it's also, we talked earlier about labor markets and things like that. So when you kind of look at the economists, then generally they talk about growth slowing. But when I looked at it a little closer, basically what they said was last year's GDP was 3%, and the projection is like 2.9 or 2.8 or something like that. So slowing, relatively speaking, the expectation actually that they're saying is it's going to look an awful lot like last year.
Now, hey, Rod, what's driving, what are the primary things driving GDP?
Yeah. And this goes back to, again, the impact, the carryover impacts from the pandemic. So for example, there was a shortage in microchips. So the manufacture of vehicles slowed. A lot of people wanted this particular new car and couldn't get it because
that was me. Me. I didn't know it was because of microchips potentially, but in my mind, I did know that there was a massive. So Rod, when I bought my car, I guess it was 3 years ago. I go into the BMW dealership, right? Mm-hmm. And like 90% of the inventory was like, you can't get it. Or it was like a year wait or something like that. It's just crazy. So anyway, I had no idea, Rod, that it was potentially due to microchip.
Yeah, I'm sure there were other things, but that was the big one they kept talking about.
There was all like the stock up that happened during the pandemic too, of like shipping not happening and that kind of. But anyway, so there was some other issues, but I'm sure that was a big factor.
Yeah, but with that as an example, in 2023, the sale of vehicles went up dramatically. And that would be, from an economic standpoint, unexpected. But you look at all the factors and you say, oh, well, of course, right? There was this pent up demand. People wanted them, and they, in some cases, they had ordered them, and it was just a matter of time to get them. And so when it finally moved and they're making this purchase, well, the sale of vehicles went up dramatically last year compared. And so some of that will carry over. But there were a lot of, like, you remember the whole like supply chain, issues, which
I remember
that was shipping. Oh yeah.
Well,
you were trying to furnish a house. I remember that.
Yeah. And it was painful, man. I tell you what, like, we could not get anything going to we moved into this house 2.5 years ago ish. And literally every piece of furniture was a struggle to get. Like, it was like, you either take what's here and like, or you wait 3, 4, 6 months for a couch to come.
Yeah. Well, and I even remember
tell you that's problematic.
You had some things where it was like, you got parts of it. Like, I remember, was it like your bedroom set or something? You got the headboard, but you couldn't get the footboard or some weird stuff like that.
Yep, we sat on a headboard for like 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And by the way, Rod, we never got the rest of the bed. We had to redo it again. So anyway, so that was a mess. That was a mess.
Yeah, and a lot of that got sorted out, and so again, pent up demand, and that combined with when the helicopter checks came, right? We all got a check in the mail, and or
whether you wanted it or not, you got it.
Yep. And a lot of people hung on to those, right? A lot of people needed to spend them at that moment for what kind of purpose that was behind them, but a lot of people hung on to them. And businesses, the PPP money, a lot of the businesses were kind of hoarding cash as well. So what happened is that got held on to, and so then there's more cash available to go out and spend. So that's why, again, last year was stronger than expected. And again, all of these things, the expectations, they carry over into this year. So that, again, lower growth, but something similar this year compared to what happened last year.
Okay. Super fun, Rod. GDP growth is going to remain about the same.
Nope.
Strong prediction. Okay, we're on number 4.
Yeah. Now the last two are number 4 is my favorite by far.
Oh, good. I'm excited
because it's like it's actually the X factor in all of this.
Okay.
And that is, it's an election year.
Yes, it is very much an election year, and I shouldn't even go on a tangent on this kind of stuff. I'll be careful. But can I just say, the presidential candidates, it's amazing that the presidential candidates are the presidential candidate.
Yeah.
It's amazing that the leading candidates are who they are.
Yeah.
I'm like, we've got this really big country full of lots of really great, like, bright, thoughtful, kind people. And yet this is what we got, Rod. I don't know what to say. Anyway, that's my take on the election year. What's yours?
Well, and so what's interesting is when you, from an economic standpoint, you say, okay, well, does the result of the election matter? Yes.
I used to think it just didn't. I used to think it didn't matter.
Because really the election is going to happen in November. So most of 2024 it's the build up toward it and what's going to happen. And what's weird about it is that what an election year means is that things are all over the board, like volatility in the stock market. And here's a good example. And maybe this is like really elementary for anybody who understands, the stock market, but in November, when the Fed made the declaration that they felt like they were no longer going to need to increase rates and there would be this reduction in rates, then you would have thought that would have created a strong push in the market, right? Big increase. And it's not that there wasn't any, but as I kind of read into it, basically what happened is there was a lot of anticipation that was going to happen. and that drove the market higher, so that by the time the announcement was actually made, there was not a lot of more movement to be had, which again, it kind of makes sense. But anyone who is trying to be ahead of the curve and anticipate and say, okay, well, what's going to happen? We're already driving that. And then again, of course, there's still some, so it did push it somewhat. But now in an election year, as people are trying to anticipate, well, what's going to happen and what's going to be the impact of that, and what are lawmakers doing right now? It's usually pretty quiet in an election year because they don't want to do things that upend the kind of the efforts of their candidate, so to speak. But no action can be a problem too, right? Because there are problems that need to be solved, and so inaction can in and of itself create problems. So I guess the moral of the story is, with an election year, that can be an X factor that can just drive things in wild and volatile ways that you just can't anticipate.
Okay, so I haven't done this, but I'm assuming, Rod, if we were to go back then and look at election years, we would see some wonky stuff happening in the economy. Fair to say?
Exactly. Yep.
Interesting.
And again, when you talk about like the stock market specifically, as different things happen in an election. Now, the last election year was 2020, and so that was just wonky anyway, right? But anyway, you go back and you look at your traditional, and you have just different, the tides moving in seemingly one direction versus another, and then that just impacting the way people think things are going to go, and so they're buying or they're selling or they're moving to tech or they're moving out of tech or they're whatever, right? Because election years are wild.
Now that we've talked about a little bit about the election and its impact on the economy, Rod, can you just give us all of your personal feelings about the candidates that we have and just some of your general feeling? And I'm just kidding. We're not going to get into politics. What sex, politics, religion,
and money. Oh wait, we're getting into money.
Well, maybe we'll just dive into all of them.
All of them. Well, here's what I'll say about candidates. It never fails to entertain.
Okay, there you go. There is a lot of entertainment.
No, it doesn't matter what expectation you had coming in. It delivers, and there's just
I do love it. One of my favorite things. It absolutely is. One of my favorite things, Rod, is when, I shouldn't even say when, it's how often a candidate gets asked a question and they just answer something entirely different. Whatever message they want to get, they're like, I know you said that, I don't care, and I'm just going to say what I want to say.
Yep.
It's incredible.
It's more like their speeches, right? They came prepared with the message that they wanted to deliver to the American people.
Yep.
And by gum,
it's wild.
They're going to deliver it.
But it is just so wild. I think about it and I'm like, this is like not human behavior, in the sense that when people ask you a question, you're supposed to respond to it.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, Rod. This is what's really crazy. What they're doing must be more effective. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. That's kind of scary to think about.
It is interesting.
Or at least it must be. There must be at least some anecdotal evidence that doing that is useful. Because here's the thing. These guys aren't dumb. Guys and girls aren't dumb, right? They're smart people. They know what's happening. They're just choosing to do it. It's bizarre, man.
Yeah.
I know I've had some really deep and impactful insights for people on the election year. So everyone, you're welcome. Okay, election. Let's move on from the election. What are we going to talk about? What's our fifth topic?
Okay, yeah. So then the fifth one is what they term as global geopolitical tensions, which boils down to Russia is still in Ukraine. There are big issues happening in the Middle East. The U.S.-China relationship is strained, and so again, if an election year is an X factor, a predictable X factor, so to speak, well, these things are kind of to the nth power the same thing, because, well, what's going to happen? We don't know, right? We don't know what's going to happen.
Complete variables, right? Or like we just, yeah, you can't accurately prognosticate. Really, it's hard to do that on anything, but especially when you're talking about things like this geopolitical landscape that is always in some sort of chaos.
Yeah. So this is where I backtrack a little bit, and where I was making fun of economists. These are the kinds of things that make it so that it really is impossible to know, because unless you can say, well, this is what's going to happen, or I can with confidence say that things are going to settle down in the Middle East, for example, and we'll come to a truce and everything is going to, work out okay. Well, we can't say that, right, with any confidence. And so, well, what happens? How much do other countries get involved? And anyway, we just don't know. And because we don't know, the thing that we do know is that to the degree that things go differently than where they are right now, it could just throw everything on its head.
Okay, Rod, give us a recap of our 5 kind of core points that we hit on, and then we'll close this thing up.
Yep. So we talked about inflation. We expect that'll continue to come into where we want it to be, more closer where we want it to be. Interest rates, I think they will reduce, and maybe even a little bit more than what they're saying.
And I've got fingers crossed, Rod. I'm holding you to it. If it's not 1.25, you're gonna buy down my loan the rest of those to get it there.
Yeah, just let me know. But if it's even better though, then what do you give?
Then I've got to pay you.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like that's a good deal. I'll take you on it.
Okay, so that's good. Okay. And then we talked about overall growth, how things being as they are, the expectations will be very similar in 2024 as it was 2023. However, with the next 2 points being the fact that it's an election year, I was going to say could kind of make things weird, but we will. We don't know how they're going to make things weird.
Yeah. They will, without question.
Yep. And then the 5th one, the global geopolitical tensions, just question mark. Who knows?
Rod, here's what I'm thinking about right now. I'm thinking, should Rod give up his day job and become a permanent economist or not? That's the big question. So if you're listening to this and you've got a take on whether Rod is an adequate economist, I'd love for you to just let us know. Because if he is a good economist, man, we're gonna set you on a course, Rod. Then we can make fun of you like the other economists.
Well, I mean, that would just be part of the course, because I'm sure I say stuff on a regular basis where people are like, okay, really? But yeah, I would just kind of open it up so that I would have more license to just say often.
Okay.
Really.
So we've got pretty like overall, we're not feeling like it's going to be this wild and crazy year. Like, it does seem like things are kind of calming down a little bit. Like, we can get a little bit more stability. And what does that mean? I hope it means for people that they're out there investing. They're out there looking for opportunities to grow, protect their wealth. Despite the things that are happening in the economy, there's always opportunities, right? Yep. There's opportunities to go against the grain in some situations that can create real significant growth. Anyway, so despite those things, go out and invest. This has been fun, Rod. Thanks for being our economist today, and we'll call you back in 6 months to see how your prognostications worked out.
I like it.
Thank you for listening to the Money Insights podcast. To learn more about the financial and business strategies discussed in this show, please visit moneyinsights.net. The views and opinions expressed on the Money Insights podcast are not intended to be individual financial, tax, or legal advice. Always consult with the appropriate advisor before making financial decisions. And if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help others find the show and learn wealth-building strategies for themselves. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.